Hi, welcome to Tea with Grayson. I'm Grayson.
I'm Courtney. I am a Montgomery County Public Schools first grade teacher. I'm also a graduate student at Loyola University, Maryland, studying literacy with National Reading Specialist certification.
Hi, I'm Amber. I am studying elementary ed here at UMD as an undergrad. This is my senior year, so I'm doing a residency in a PGCPS classroom with first graders.
I'm Kenya Combs. I'm an undergrad at Howard University. I participated in the Inside Out program and Young Ladies of Tomorrow.
All right, I want to thank you guys so much for coming together and discussing this topic with us. Today we're going to be talking about young adult literature and its effects on society and its importance of use in the classroom. So the first thing I want to bring up is, what books did you guys all enjoy? Were you big into the Harry Potter series or Hunger Games, or what books really stood out to you when you were teenagers?
Harry Potter more was like beginning of adolescence for me. It was around middle school, 5th grade. As a teenager, it was like less common books, but like thinking about it, they were all like characters very similar to who I was. They were young girls in high school, and the drama they were going through sounds silly, but
I definitely think, I know for me, Harry Potter wasn't a big thing just because of the witchcraft in it. My parents are very religious. They're not really into that. But I know a lot of books that dealt with, drama in middle school. Like, I think it was just the drama books that every girl was kind of into, or the love story, like the romance story. I was really big in the Twilight series.
Oh,
so
yeah.
that was definitely big for me. I read all of those books.
So similar to what they were saying, I was really big into like the fantasy, and like towards middle school I discovered like dystopian like society books that I really enjoyed. And then as I got older, I would go with like the romance, love, like fiction that I really gravitated to as well.
Nice. I was personally big fan of like the Percy Jackson series. I read that
Oh, yeah.
cover to cover, book
my
to book.
brother was very into those.
Love those. Alrighty, so the first thing that I wanted to bring up to you was a quote by Stephen Welk, who writes for the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy. And he wrote an article called Reading for a Better World, Teaching for Social Responsibility with Young Adult Literature. And this was the quote, and I just wanted to see what you guys thought of it. Teaching for social responsibility with good books does far more than encourage civic participation. It redefines the purpose of school and empowers all of us, students, teachers, administrators, parents, to be better people and live more fulfilling lives. How does that make you think of that?
That actually makes me think of a quote from grad school, and it's the one that stood out to me throughout my whole entire program. It's a quote by Rudine Sims Bishop, and she says, "Books are windows, mirrors, and doors. They're mirrors so you can see yourself in the literature, windows to view into the lives of other people, and doors to really understand their experience and go into their world." So with your quote, it makes me think of that, because kids need to see themselves in literature, and they also need to see people that are completely different from them so they can learn about other perspectives and other cultures and understand the world around them and understand how to navigate through the world.
Yeah, just to piggyback off that a bit, diversity is very important. I knew growing up I didn't see a lot of girls my color in books or in movies and things like that. But now, it's a wider spectrum as far as diversity, and you get to see, different people of color in, whether it be in books, movies, cartoons. You see a lot more of that, which I think is a great thing, because growing up I definitely didn't see a lot of myself, whether it be in the classroom or on TV, commercials and things like that. So now that it's kind of being talked about and people are understanding that diversity is so important, I think it's a great thing that to see yourself in the type of literature. Like, I know I have a book at home that actually has my name on it with, a little black girl with curly thick hair, So having that growing up showed me that, like, I can be in movies, I can do things like that, and it's not just, one specific type of color.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was another thing in my graduate courses that really stood out to me. There was a statistic, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but what I remember was, even in 2018, the majority of books are written by white authors featuring white characters, and there are more like literature, like books that have animals as the star characters versus children of color, and that just amazed me because everyone should be able to have a book where they can have a character that looks just like them and does things just like them that they can connect with. So it's something as a society we really need to continue working on and expanding.
Could you repeat it?
Absolutely. Teaching for social responsibility with good books does far more than encourage civic participation. It redefines the purpose of school and empowers all of us, students, teachers, administrators, parents, to be better people and live more fulfilling lives.
Okay, so I'm kind of fixated on the last portion. So like, my thinking is when a kid learns something, they take it home, and then they can obviously educate everybody else. And we have a lot of prejudice and racism, like especially with the older generation. So I feel like if they could go home and they can, I don't want to say educate, but like they kind of bring up these different perspectives and like remind their family like these people are human too, like they have feelings, they have ambitions just like we are. I think that's one way to kind of narrow that gap.
Absolutely.
Alrighty, those are all awesome points that you guys made earlier. Another quote that I would like to get your thoughts and opinions on is written by Gay Ivey and Peter H. Johnston in their weekly article for Reading Research Quarterly. And the article is called Engagement with Young Adult Literature, Outcomes and Processes. And basically they said young adult literature is potentially a useful tool for engaged reading among adolescents. Contemporary selections, and in particular, are inherently relevant that by design they are responsive to the emotional and cultural challenges young people face in their everyday lives. Now, I found that quite fascinating because people need to find some type of relatability and accessibility to the characters they read in order to identify. So there are plenty of books with white male characters that I'm sure I could model myself after or apply to, but I didn't necessarily identify with those very cookie cutter characters. I was more so like I said earlier, I was a big Percy Jackson fan. So the fact that he had ADHD and dyslexia and was very adventure driven was something that I identified with and I latched on to. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Amber?
Yeah. So I was thinking towards your engagement portion. So of course engagement's super important, and if you don't have engagement, especially at the beginning of your lesson, you've already lost majority of your students. So that's definitely important. I think it's also important as teachers to show a variety of different genres and different characters and different settings for students to really immerse in different cultures and to try to find that thing that they identify with, like you said. And so I actually have one student who's an ELL student, so he's very limited with his English, and so he gravitates towards this one type of book where it's just pictures, there's no words, and he creates his own stories. And I thought that this was awesome because he gave it to me and he said, "Miss Tate, can you read this to me?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So I opened it and I was like, "Oh my god, there's no words, what am I gonna do?" So yeah, you just have to kind of figure out what they gravitate to, and then obviously supply that in the classroom.
Side note, what book was that? Do you remember the title?
I don't, but I know I Googled it.
Well, yeah.
I'll look it up later.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah, well, just to piggyback off that, I know nowadays it is hard for people to be engaged in reading, especially, the young adults. And I just think that it starts off at the beginning. If you think about it, back when we were in elementary school, reading was such a big thing. You'd come down, sit on the carpet, you'd have that time for reading from your teacher. And now, as you gravitate and you move forward, it's not such a big deal anymore because now they're like, oh, no more pictures, you're too old to look at pictures. And it's like, why can't you have both in a book,
Mm-hmm.
Like, why do you have to just focus on the words? And I feel like, that sometimes drives kids away from that. Because you do have kids coming from that low poverty income, so it's like maybe they can't afford the books that they want, or maybe they, their interest isn't in those particular types of books that are at school. So it's like it is very important to have that variety and that genre there, because you are going to have kids from different backgrounds that essentially need different types of books. You can't have the same type of book for all students. It's just not gonna work, and you're not gonna keep everybody's, engagement. So
Right, that's an excellent point. I used to teach 5th grade, and I remember when we were doing a unit on a book called At City of Ember. And there's 2 versions of this book, actually. There's one that's a typical novel, but then there was also a version that was a graphic novel. And Montgomery County in our curriculum had us reading the graphic novel to the students, and they were so engaged into this book because, like, with all the pictures and images, it's something that they, like you said, they weren't like used to having anymore because they're in 5th grade, they're reading novels, but they're still, they're 10 years old, they're at the beginning of adolescence, they still like having the pictures. And then especially when you consider the 5th graders that are reading below a 5th grade level, those pictures are so helpful to them to understand the story, because if they're reading on their own and not being read to, they can look at the pictures and use them to help them decode. If they have a word that they're stuck on, they can reference the picture to help them. So like you said, it's very important to have a wide variety of text types available, but also too, just all different types of characters. And even if there's a character that isn't like you, they may have some sort of quality, like you said with Percy Jackson, that a child can relate to. And adolescence is such a challenging time in life. There's so much like inner turmoil that kids are going through. Sometimes they really just need to see that they're not alone in the world and there's someone else experiencing the same struggles and challenges that they are. So I just think it's so important to expose kids to books as often as you can, so they can, 1, see that there are other people like them, and 2, see how other people solve those struggles and problems, so that kids can take those books and apply them to their own lives and try to become better, stronger people.
and just a side note off that really quick, it's also important the people they have at home, because I know sometimes my parents didn't push me to read. I had to push myself. So you are going to have those students that, do feel alone and don't feel like they relate to stuff. Because I know I personally felt that way when I was growing up. So it's really important, like the people that they have, like the staff, the workers, everybody has to make sure they're putting 110% in every child and, pushing them to be engaged and enhanced.
Absolutely.
And I actually want to add something to what you said. So during parent-teacher conferences, I have a few kids who are obviously below, and we're working on like certain skills, like pulling out main idea and details out of the text. And so one of the parents was like, I'm really struggling to work with my kid because, there's that language barrier. Like she's probably 2nd, 3rd generation, like ESOL kid. So it's not like English is completely new to her. So my mentor and I actually sent the mom home with some books in Spanish, so they could still like get the concept and everything, and they could still work on grabbing those details and pulling it out of the story. So I feel like a lot of, especially like older teachers, don't do that, or like they're so fearful of like having this other language that they don't know be applied. And I think that's like another way that you could help that.
Absolutely.
Well, with like bilingual students and just students in general, I tell parents all the time, just read to your child. Your child does not have to read to you all the time. If you want your child to like reading, you need to get them into books that they like. So I have a parent of a child that I'm working with right now for graduate school. He's in 2nd grade, but he's reading at about like a halfway through 1st grade level. So he's not horribly behind, but he is a little bit behind. And his mother was saying to me how she keeps pulling books for him to read, and at home he's always, complaining he doesn't want to read. So I was like, so don't make him read. Go to the library, have him pick out books on topics that he likes, even if the reading level of that book is higher than what he can do, and you read to him. Because even just you reading to him is going to help him to hear what a fluent reader sounds like, and to hear the upper level vocabulary, and to have him, he can still have conversations about comprehension and what he's learning from that book with you without him actually being the one to decode it. So I just tell them all the time, if you want your kids to like reading, put them in books that they like, even if they're too hard for them, you read to them. It's still going to be helpful.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. All wonderful points. All right. So we're going to take a commercial break, and then we'll be right back.
Okay.
One more time.
Alrighty, welcome back. Alrighty. So another thing that I wanted to bring up was also by Gay Ivy and Peter Johnston, where they said that young adult literature is itself dialogic. That is, it participates in the vibrant and constantly shifting cultural dialogue regarding what we value and how our lives might be lived both responsibly and responsively in the face of increasing globalization, perspective, altering technologies, and ideological challenge and change. And another thing, one thing I really like to focus on with that one personally is the cultural dialogue. Because, and as I understand, a lot of you have experience in the elementary schools, but the cultural dialogue starts there. But how does that progress into the older years? The genesis is in that elementary year, but how do you think that expands as they get older?
Well, as an elementary school teacher in first grade, again, one of the things I've really taken away from my grad school experience is diversity in literature and how important it is. So I've made a point in the last couple of years to grab as many books with as many different types of characters as I possibly can and read those to my students and have conversations about, well, how is this character different from you and what can we learn from that character? So they build that foundation of everyone is different and that is perfectly okay and there's nothing wrong with someone being different from you, and what may be normal to you may be completely abnormal to somebody else. So I would say building that foundation in the early years and building it up, we would hope that as kids get older they remember those messages and still apply them to their everyday lives, where when they see someone that's different from them, they, react in a positive, respectful, understanding way. But it's not something we can just stop in elementary school and say, okay, they learned it. It's something we have to continue and keep developing on as they get older. In elementary school with topics in diversity, it's pretty simple, obviously, because the children are so young. But as they get older, you can talk about cultural issues that are a little bit heavier. Teens with depression, teens that have attempted suicide, teens with drug problems, all different kinds of culturally diverse topics, because again, diversity isn't just race, it's mentally abled and disabled and disabilities and religion, sexuality is a big one. I know in my adolescent literature class, we read several books on gay and LGBT, transgender as well, teens. And it's just so important for people to understand there's so many ways for you to be different and there's nothing wrong with that, and we have to respect everyone. So just kind of taking the topic of diversity and really expanding on it as they get older.
Yeah, to piggyback off that, I think in middle school, I wasn't really exposed to a lot of diversity. Like, yeah, there was, different types of people and everybody hung out in their own groups, but it wasn't like a big talk, I think, for me in middle school. I think where it definitely hit me the most was more so in high school and in college, definitely, especially since, I attend an HBCU, which is, a big thing, within the Black community is, attending colleges where you have people that look like you, just because a lot of other colleges, specifically, PWIs don't really expand more so on diversity. Like you do have the Black Student Union at certain colleges, but it's not really a big topic of conversation. It's kind of like, oh, if it doesn't come up, then we'll just kind of pass by it. Like, it's not a big deal. But at the end of the day, I think, diversity should be discussed all throughout, a child's learning experience, like in elementary school, middle school, high school, college. It's all super important, because if you attend certain areas where there's one specific type of race, you're only going to be used to that one specific type of race, and it's not going to prepare you for the real world, because the real world is a melting pot. It's not just one specific type of race. You're going to be exposed to all type of people. So it's really important for schools to definitely dive into every type of disadvantage that other races have, So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think mine kind of overviews what they were saying too. Like, for example, there's some early elementary books that you could read, I think it's called The Sneetches by Dr. Seuss, and then I read this one to my kids about basically how it's from like the daughter's perspective on how their parents met, and basically like they wanted to go on a date, and the mom was of an Asian culture and the dad was American, and the dad, who was American, wanted to show I guess now his wife that he could use chopsticks, and then she really wanted to go to an American restaurant so she could show that she could like eat with her hands like a hamburger. It was really adorable. Yeah, so I think you can like really like starting at very young ages, like Courtney was saying, like you can really like kind of touch upon it, but you won't really be able to, you know, really go deep until they are older, where they can like understand and kind of like extend on that kind of topic, because like it's not easy to just be like, oh well, in the past we've been really crappy to people of color, like, you know, they're gonna have questions like why, and you know, personally, like I don't know how I would respond to that. Like I can't just be like, oh well, we just took advantage of them. Like it's the truth, but you know, that's not for like a 7-year-old to hear.
No, but it is though at the same time, because you have to kind of teach them.
I know, but like,
yeah, it's hard to. I get what you mean. It's very hard to explain that to a
Yeah.
7-year-old, but you kind of just have to tell the truth and say, you know, in history, people were not nice to each other, and that's just the fact. Like the people that
well,
were
yeah, but
white.
you're still sugarcoating it without really digging deep. That's what I'm
Well,
kinda
that's
saying.
that's where I want to kind of like touch on how it's really important for parents to educate their kids as well.
Absolutely.
And like it is a tough conversation to have, but imagine the conversations that, you know, other people have to have. And I know my parents had to have the conversation with me as far as, you know, police officers and being a black woman, and how do you think parents feel when they have to sit down their 10-year-old son and tell them, if the cops ever pull you over, there's a chance you're gonna get shot.
Yeah.
You know, it's like at the end of the day, you guys sugarcoat it, other races keep it 100% real, and that's what you have to do. You can't sugarcoat it with your kids. You have to tell them exactly what it is, because if not, they're gonna hear it later, but it's gonna be a totally different story. You know what I'm saying? So I think it just makes more sense to just tell it straight to your kids and be like, hey, this is exactly
Even
what
if
happened.
it's not your kids.
Even if it's not your kids.
Even if it's not your kids, I feel as though you should at least touch base on it. I'm not saying go into full depth, because at the end of the day, they're not your kids.
Right.
Yeah.
But I
That's
would at least have
the
the
barrier.
conversation with the parents and be like, hey, if your kid has a question on this is how I'm gonna express it. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
I think that's a good conversation to have.
So do you
So
think
I
that you
agree.
should go from, like they were saying, from like a 7-year-old perspective, do you think you should tell them right then and there, or do you think you should take a tidbit of knowledge and expand it over their education career?
I would kind of expand it, because at the end of the day, it's not your kid. You can't really say exactly, like you can't put it into words of how you would tell your own kid.
Right.
But you
Yeah.
should have the conversation with the kids in general, and again, take it to the parents if you would like to go into a deeper level and see if that's okay with the parents. Because at the end of the day, what the parents want to know what their kids are learning.
Right.
So, and you don't want to go behind their back and be like, oh, this is, well, I got to keep it real and tell them
Yeah,
this
and these
way.
young adult books really give them something where they're learning the facts,
Yeah.
but through like a third person
Right.
Yeah,
perspective.
and that's like the tough thing as far as books from like the past, because then it's like you are hearing it from one side, or you're not getting the full
true.
facts, because it's like you're not hearing it from both sides.
Yeah.
Of, you know,
There's
the
a
story.
great book about that. It's called The Hate You Give.
Oh,
Yeah.
I want to read that so
And there's a
badly.
movie
We
out
talked about it.
it.
One of the things I've really been thinking about lately is white privilege, and as a white teacher, unfortunately, like in my school, most of the teachers are white. Even when I was working at a Title I school where all of the children were children of color, almost the entire staff was white. And it's something that you really have to take into account, because like as Kenya said, you know, her and her family, like they've had conversations, like the example you gave with the 10-year-old, I would have never thought of that, because that's not part of what I grew up knowing. And that's, you know, you have to take into account, like, there are certain things you don't know because of what you were exposed to growing up, and you have to step outside of that box and consider those other perspectives. Like the problem with white privilege is in a lot of cases it's not that we don't care and we are just like, oh, blah blah blah. We just don't know. Like, we have to, as adults,
Take a step
expand,
back.
take a step back and expand ourselves and say, oh, wait a minute, like, I didn't even know about that, but now that I do, I need to acknowledge it, and I need to help make the world a better place and consider all these other perspectives that I've never been exposed to be the best teacher that I can for my students.
It's really just all about stepping out of your comfort zone. I think a lot of people are just so
That's
used
true.
to being comfortable.
Absolutely.
But in order to make a change, you have to be uncomfortable. Like, change is uncomfortable. It's not comfortable. So you have to, in order to make those changes, that's just what you have to do.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and it starts with the teachers. You know, we have to, before we teach the kids about it, we need to have those thoughts
have
and
that
conversations
understanding,
and that
exactly.
understanding. Yeah, or else it's not going to be authentic.
Yeah, that's true.
So another thing that I found very fascinating was a quote by Lois T. Stover, where in the English Journal she wrote an article called "What's New in Young Adult Literature for High School Students." She said, "Intrigued and concerned as many young adults were about social issues and dilemmas, something far more immediate constantly pressed in upon them, their own personal need to survive in an often unfriendly world." As we know, middle school and high school are very trying times. There's bullying, religious findings, sexual awakenings, drugs, all that jazz. And it's important to look into it and be aware of it and not sweep it under the rug. As teachers, it's our job to help you find out who you are, where you are. If you're in a dark spot, bring you to a better spot. If you're in a better spot, bring you even further up. It's our job to support you. So basically what I'm curious about is, through young adult literature, there are books that you can relate to, or just books that touch you. And, you know, like a broken record, I found that in Percy Jackson, but also I found that in books that I read further on. There were things that I could really identify with. There were books with gay characters, and I could look into their struggle even though I don't have that similar struggle. And religious texts, or it's like, I'm not Jewish or Muslim, but I can understand and sympathize with the concept of oppression. And even racial terms, that I am a white male, but there are things that I can step back and realize that's awful and identify with that. But I was just curious, when you all were in school, what books stood out to you?
I guess I can start. So I remember in high school I read The Kite Runner, which is basically takes place in like an Afghan area.
Yes, Afghanistan.
Afghanistan.
By
yeah.
Khalid Sami.
Yeah. And I remember like at the obviously I'm still dating him, but so my boyfriend's from Iran, and like his, actually I shouldn't probably say that, but it's like you'll be like disowned if you're gay basically. And so basically in the book, one of the kids is raped by another guy, and like I was just like, this was like a complete like opening to me, because I was like, wow, like it was so graphic. I've never read something like as like heavy and graphic as that before. And then I also had this like outside prior knowledge of like how wrong it is in their culture. So I was just like there's a deeper meaning that like I had to like really struggle with, I would say. And so that's like one example.
Do you want me to go? In my adolescent literature class, one of the very first things my professor said was, in this class, we are going to talk about books with really heavy topics, not just racism, LGBT teens, rape, sexual just issues, drugs, alcohol, violence, murder. Just, these are all the topics that you don't see in obviously elementary school literature, because they're mature topics. But when you get into adolescence, you need to be exposed to these topics, because these are the things that are going on in the world around you, and you're first kind of like, as you get older, you're going to start learning about them at some point. So this is a way to learn about them in a safe environment. I can think of a couple books when I was in high school. One was called Cut, and it was about a girl with depression and anxiety, and she was cutting herself. I remember I read another one about a girl with an eating disorder, and I had never heard of some of these things. And then as I was reading, I was like, oh wait, maybe I have known about these things all along and just didn't realize what they were. And I can learn through this character's experience without actually experiencing this myself. But I think the book that stands out to me the most right now, I actually read as an adult actually earlier this year. It was History is All You Left Me. And I read it for my adolescent literature course. My professor didn't give us she gave us 1 or 2 assigned books, but our main assignment of the course was she wanted us to read, I believe it was like 15 books, and she said, they are your choice. Like, I want you to find adolescent literature that you are going to fall in love with and connect to and want to read. So in this book, it's all about a gay teen whose boyfriend, or ex-boyfriend at the time, dies, and the heartbreak that he goes through with experiencing his death. And at that period of time, like, I was kind of experiencing a heartbreak, so I was like, oh, I want to read this because I want to hear about someone else's heartbreak and how they got through it, even though the experience is completely different from mine. I'm not a gay teen, but I could relate to his pain and his heartache and how he worked through all of that. So again, just to repeat what I said in previous questions, diversity isn't just race, it's all kinds of experiences.
I think a lot of the books I read growing up were definitely about, I think in my middle school phase, it was more so about girls, you know, struggling with that mental disorder, like an eating disorder, or what's the word I'm thinking of with the B?
Bulimia?
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I read a lot about that in middle school, just because I could relate to it a little bit. Definitely as far as like the eating disorder, I've definitely related to that in middle school. So reading those types of books and understanding that like it was okay and that there's treatments for that and there's ways to get through it definitely helped me and a lot of my other friends that were definitely going through that time, because you know how I think society plays a huge role in how young girls view themselves, especially in the media. And I think back then being skinny was in, you know, like being skinny was it. And so that played a big role on how I viewed things. But when I read about it in the book and could really relate to that character, it definitely helped, you know, shape who I was and understand that, you know, this isn't the way to go about things, you know, and to truly just love yourself. I think reading those types of books where you find self-love and understanding that the way you are is perfectly fine, because everybody is different, everybody is unique in their own special way. I think those types of books really help, you know, shape who I am and me have the type of confidence that I do now as, you know, a young adult and someone who's still growing and still learning, which I think everybody still is. You know, life is a journey. We don't know what we're doing. We're just kind of going with the flow, and whatever comes our way, comes our way. So I think definitely learning from those types of books definitely shaped the person who I am today, and I don't know where I would be if I didn't cross that path with that certain book.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another thing I just was curious about is young adult literature is also very controversial. And for a current example, Netflix produced a series called 13 Reasons Why.
That was actually a book.
Yeah,
I
which
read.
was based off of
It
young
was
adult.
I read that book in high school when it first
Now,
came out.
since it came out, the suicide rate has actually increased. However, it is more, the topic of suicide is more in conversation than it's ever been.
Well, yeah, because they basically mainstream it.
So
Yeah.
unfortunately.
What do you guys think about that?
So unfortunately with that, when you do bring certain topics like that to the media, it's always going to be a bittersweet experience, because you're going to get, like, the negative side of that is that, yes, suicide rates have gone up, but the positive side about it is that it's being talked about more, and now more people are like, well, what can we do to stop this, or what can we do to help, you know? Now it's like, oh, if you know someone who's having suicidal thoughts, here's a number you can call, or here's someone you can talk to. Like, there's now, it's been broadcasted in a sense, there's more ways to help people that have been feeling like this. And as someone who's had suicidal thoughts, I think it's a great idea for more people to know about it. Now, the way it was gone about, it's not
That's
the best way to
no.
go about it at all. I don't think it was a good idea to, mainstream it, but unfortunately, again, there's always going to be the pros and the cons to certain situations like this, especially suicide.
Well, I watched the first season of the series, and I read the book in high school. And I remember when they started advertising the series coming out, I was like, oh yeah, I read that book. The problem with it is even in the book, they romanticized suicide.
Yeah.
Hannah was having all these different struggles with all these different people, and the way she solved that was she killed herself, but then by leaving back those tapes, she was kind of getting her final revenge, and she was getting the last word no matter what, which kind of like gave it this feeling of, oh look, like she got what she wanted, now all these people feel bad and they like know that what they did was wrong, but it didn't, but she really didn't, because now she's dead. So the media definitely needs to, one, address suicide like you said, and two, talk about it, expose people to it, get them help. But they need to make changes where they're not kind of spinning it in this romanticized way, like, oh look, she got her goal,
Yeah.
because she didn't.
Yeah. I mean, also I've seen a few episodes and it's way too graphic, like especially from like a point of view, like if somebody was like sexually abused or whatever, like that would be a huge trigger, I feel. Whereas like when you're reading the pages, like obviously it's not like in your face, like you have to put it together.
Yeah, make
But
your
it's
own
not
image.
like an immediate trigger, I feel.
Well, I remember too when I was in high school and I read the book, and the scene where she's raped in the hot tub, the way they worded it in the book, I didn't process it as
Exactly.
I didn't process it of like actual like penetrative rape. Like I was kind of like, oh, he's doing stuff to her in the hot tub and it's not okay. And then when I watched the series, well, like before I even watched the series, as an adult, I kind of looked back and read it again, and I was like, oh yeah, that's rape. But being
It
what
wasn't
the
like in your
experience,
face.
right? Well, like
Yeah.
even at that time too, like the things that I experienced in my life and like my knowledge base, like it didn't immediately jump to make me think of rape. Like I thought like, oh, like he's definitely doing something wrong, but I can't really picture it fully.
Like sexual stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
But then in the show, it's like very graphic. So there's a big
I never
difference.
watched the show.
You don't.
Yeah,
You
I
don't.
didn't watch the
Couldn't
second.
really.
I didn't watch the second season because I'm like, well, the book ends
With
with
her.
her. Like, how do you continue on the show with the? Like, you went through all the tapes. How do you keep the show up? So, yeah.
Alrighty, guys, I have one final question for you. It's a conversation that has been stimulated by young adult literature goddesses Olivia and Autumn, and it's about young adult literature's place in the classroom and in the curriculum.
Mhm.
People read young adult literature by choice, but it is not so much required in the curriculum. The curriculum is filled with old white male authors. Do you think the curriculum should be adjusted to include more diversity? And not that we're completely getting rid of every single classic, but do you think that it needs to be reworked?
Absolutely.
Tanya?
Yeah. I think definitely we need diversity. Like we need more people of color in the classroom. That's definitely very important. So I don't feel as though we should get rid of all the classics. I feel like we all take something different from the classics that we have read in the past. But I do think they should incorporate, different types of writing by different types of people within the classroom. That's definitely very important.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I didn't, like, as a child until, like, middle school, like, I didn't like reading at all. And then once I found, like, dystopian, like, fiction, I really, like, started to enjoy reading. And I didn't even, like, get that experience until, like, 9th, 10th grade. And I think, like, that's, like, a genre that's, like, more current than it was back then. And just, like Kenya was saying, like our population has changed tremendously, and it doesn't reflect in the older books. Like it, like we were talking about, it's so important that kids see themselves in those characters. And right now, it's not provided with the more traditional books.
Right. If you want a child to be engaged in what you're teaching them, they need to connect to it. And it's hard to connect with a character that's set in something that happened hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago. They're going to be more engaged and more in tune to the message you're trying to teach them if they can connect to the content or the character or the author, anything about that book. And like we've said before, diversity isn't just race. There are so many different topics that a kid could get just hooked in on. So I definitely think it needs to be in the classroom. But again, because adolescent literature has so many mature topics, we really need to carefully plan out what we're going to be read, what's the purpose of reading it, and the message we're trying to get across to our students. So we're not, taking this like complicated topic and teaching it in a way where it's not coming across in the message that we wanted them to get from it. And like I said in previous questions, making sure we're not putting in our own kind of biases and like putting our own viewpoints in. Like, we don't want to, force our ideas on kids. We want them to
Find their own.
Yeah, find their own. We want to like stimulate intellectual conversations where we hear these points and debate them out. But again, the world it's changing, and and it's already, in Montgomery County, it's pretty diverse, but you go anywhere else and it's not yet. And as the world keeps going, that diversity is going to expand. It's not just going to be in certain areas of the country. It's going to be everywhere. So we really need to teach these kids about people that are different from them and have conversations about compassion and understanding and respect. And the best way to do that is in the classroom with a text.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that it's beyond vital that these students have accessibility to more diverse texts, because as much as important as The Great Gatsby, Catcher in the Rye, Call of the Wild, Streetcar Named Desire, whatever it may be.
Sorry.
Yeah. And as good as classic as they are, Moby Dick, all of them, you need to. That was a little dry, but
A little.
it's so important that they have accessibility.
Right.
And see, and kind of going back to your mirror concept, being able to see themselves in the literature they read.
Yeah.
Because we don't want them to be, if you don't talk about history, it goes away.
Right.
So these books are important to talk about, but maybe they shouldn't be the main focus of the conversation.
Right. It can't be it. Like, if we want to create a society where we don't have so many of these social problems as inequality and racism and violence, we need to teach people how to be compassionate and how to treat other people.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, you can't just expose them to the same type of book over and over and over. You have to give them access
Racial
to
context,
right.
sexual context.
With that Rudine Sims Bishop quote, the final piece of that quote is sliding glass doors into new worlds, and it's just so important because, like, to piggyback on what Kenya said earlier, I wouldn't have thought to explain to a 10-year-old the dangers of a police officer because that's not my world, and you need to be exposed to other people's worlds to understand. Like, there are so many things that you may have never thought of, and again, that's the problem with white privilege. There are so many things as white teachers we don't think about. It's not part of our world. We've never been exposed to it. And it's not like purposeful ignorance. It's, oh, I've never heard of this. And now that I have, we want to make people,
instruction.
yeah, you need to be exposed to so many different scenarios. That's how you're going to teach people compassion, and that's how you're going to change the world.
Well, I want to thank you guys so much for coming on The Tea with Grayson.
Thank you for having
Yeah,
us.
thank
It's
you.
an
Thank you
honor.
so much.
Thank you.
This is Grayson, signing out.